Now, we'd like to commence the session on the development plans for the self-reliance and integrated care of disabled persons in community. I'm afraid we have to move on to the introduction of our moderator. Let me introduce today's moderator, Ms. Choi Kyung-soo became a member of the Presidential Commission on Policy Planning and the director of the Korea Disabled People's Development Institute. She has participated in the development of policies for the disabled in Korea. Let me hand it over to the moderator. Hello, everyone. This session is on the development plans for the self-reliance and integrated care of disabled peoples in the community. This session will cover a variety of measures that have been designed for the support of the disabled in the community. And also, I believe this will provide a meaningful opportunity to have a discussion about support for the disabled people in the community. Let me introduce our participants. I'd like to give my special thanks to Ms. Ines Bulik because she's in Belgium and it's quite early in Belgium. I'd like to introduce Ms. Ines Bulik Kozukariu, the Secretary General of the European Network on Independent Living. Hello.
Hello, hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation. Good morning from Europe. Yes, it's not good morning at your end. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be with you and to speak to you about developing plans for supporting disabled people to live independently in the community. I will get started immediately. I know the time is short. So first of all, let me just move this. First of all, let me say something about my organization, the European Network on Independent Living. We are
네, 사무총장님, 제가 말을 끊어서 대단히
Sorry to interrupt. It was just a brief introduction of yourself, and we will give you time for your presentation.
Okay, sorry about that.
이어서 오늘 발표를 해주실
Now we have two presenters. We have Mr. Kang Seok-bong from Jeju Special Self-Governing Province, and also we have Professor Kim Yong-duk from Seonggonghae University. We have four panelists. First of all, we have Mr. Shin Yong-ho from the Ministry of Health and Welfare. We also have Mr. Kim Dong-ho from the Korea Differently Abled Federation, and also we have Mr. Ms. Kim Jung-duk from Jeju Research Institute. And also we have Professor Byun Kyung-hee from Hanshin University. Right after lunchtime, it's pretty exhausting for all of you, so why don't we give a big round of applause to each other? Let us officially begin our session. Our first presenter will be delivered by Mr. Kang Seok-bong.
Jeju Special Self-Governing Province Welfare Division for the Disabled. And prior to my presentation, I would like to share the video for the disabled produced by Jeju Island, and then let me go over my presentation. Let's take a look.
시원한 바람도 많이
카페 사장이 되어가지고 6일 때까지 일을 하고 싶습니다. 저는 안 쳐요, 지금.
We have to save a lot of money to buy a house. And I dream of a life that I can decorate my room by my own. So during the selection for the coffee bean, you need to be really meticulous, and the autistic disabled people are really focused. That's the reason that they are really good at doing this job. So considering the features of the disabled people, we need to match them with the proper jobs, and then they can excel. Last year, I learned about coffee, and at that time, I got interested in latte art. So when working at a cafe, we need to focus a lot on coffee, and after work, I study more about coffee. In the Peace Village, I've been working for about 19 years, and it's really rewarding. And until I save a lot of money, I would like to work a lot. And basically, they have their own career of more than 15 years, and they are kind of experts. They are the masters of sausage making, and based on that confidence built from their job, they will get boosted. So Jeju autonomy for the first time in Korea is supporting the labor cost for the working disabled people. But because of the COVID-19, it's really a hard time. But thanks to the subsidy from the Jeju government, we are doing well. This is a integrated care project for the local community under the cooperation between the private sector and the public sector, so that a integrated service would be provided for the welfare and well-being of the disabled people. And Jeju City is the only case that operates the integrated care center. And what's most important in here is that the disabled people has to have their own place. Since I moved to this place, I could lead my own life safely, and that's quite satisfying. Housing, daily life, medical service, self-reliance, and social participation are the areas that we are supporting. So bias against the disabled and the lack of the sensitivity against the disabled people, we must bolster the welfare policies at the national level so that they would be more sound. So the policies and the local level of the public awareness go together.
다시 드리겠습니다.
So let me greet again. I am Kang Seok-bong from Jeju Autonomy, and I am given 10 minutes, and I need to try to be quick as possible. And the session has been canceled last year due to COVID-19, and this is the first trial to have a session like this regarding integrated care and the self-sufficiency or self-reliance of the disabled people. And this opportunity will serve as a venue for sharing the case studies, and that will be really helpful for restoring and recovering the Jeju Island. So I would like to firstly thank the experts for participating in today's event. And there are a lot of audience who are watching us via YouTube. I would like to thank the watchers too. And from now on, Jeju Island will become the center for the integrated care for the disabled people, and to make it realized, I will do my best. And due to COVID-19, contactless services are provided right now, so face-to-face services are ceased currently. However, care must not be stopped, although the situation is getting worse. But it's really hard to meet the caregiver these days. However, that does not mean that we can just stop the caregiving. There is a Bible saying that we are trying to find one lost sheep rather than 99 shepherd. So thanks to the integrated care service for the blind site, we can light up lights for the people who are in need of care. And this is the current status of the registered disabled people in Jeju area. There are a lot of people who is registered as a disabled, and from the year of 2016 there were more than 30,000 people, including elderly generation. And in the near future we will enter the super elder society due to the aging phenomena. So we need to provide the care in a comprehensive manner, including housing, care, education, vocational education. So as of now, by this year, Jeju City will conduct the initiative project for integrated care for the disabled people, especially for the developmental disability. So there are some times that we feel the blind sides in care, and due to the burden of taking care of family members, it's really hard to conduct a seamless or organically integrated service. That's what we call the limit of the integrated service, because the services are conducted in a separated way. So the society is pointing out that we need to integrate the total package of the service, and Jeju Island can take advantage of those efforts because the local community has already expressed their strong will to take the lead in the caregiving services. So this year, the announcement was made on the initiative project for integrated care at the local level, and we had discussion sessions. And in April, with Daegu, we were selected as the pilot location for the integrated care project. And after the launching ceremony, the system was we're fast building the institution for the projects. So there are various types of services that we are providing, or at least we're preparing to provide. So it's just a humble beginning point, and it's not an easy beginning. However, as we are accumulating know-hows and experiences, we will make it a beneficial project thanks to the efforts from the involved parties. And in November, the Center for Supporting the Integrated Care will open, creating synergy effect. So the integrated care is conducted via 26 care channels in Upmyeondong administrative units, and there are people for welfare expertise and nurses who will be dispatched for the centers. So from administrative perspective, the registration will be applied to the channel. And the subject to the initiative will be selected by the city of Jeju. And there are more than 490,000 people to be cared. Among them, about half of them are the disabled, which takes about 5% of the total population of Jeju Island. So the registered disabled people takes about more than 20%. And severely disabled people takes a large chunk of the total population, and they are in desperate need of care. This is the reason that we need to institutionalize or set up policies toward them. And there is a meeting consortium for the local care. So in collaboration with the private sector and the public sector together, we are having meetings, and we are operating the consortium for connecting the investments into the centers, local care centers. And the centers, so the Social Confederation is conducting the project for the centers, and the lease housing for the disabled or provided via the home care service. And the happiness planner and the direct service provider, who is called happiness coaches, are working for the integrated care while operating the share and care centers.
하고 있습니다. 24시간 긴급 돌봄 지원.
So in an urgent situation, some could be taken care of at the center. And for the self-reliance housings, there are a lot of disabled people who are waiting for moving into the housings, along with the happiness planner and happiness coaches. And let's take a look at the features of the initiative compared to other regions. So the application for the service are done by the channels or the counters at the local level, and by doing so, the publicity would be improved and strengthened. And for the self-reliance housings, a unit of house would be provided for a disabled person, and the responsibility is in the hands of the administrative organization, not a service provider. That's quite a remarkable feature of Jeju welfare policies. And in order to make a gap in providing the welfare services for the disabled people, a number of policies are carried out. So we are supporting the activities of the disabled people 24/7. And for female disabled people, we are supporting the household helpers. So there are a lot of related services for taking care of or supporting the self-reliance of the disabled people. And let me talk about the integrated welfare 하나로 initiative. By operating the integrated care support center, we could collaborate with the public sector and the private sector, and we integrated the channel for the service provider So there are more than 360 types of services that were provided by the government. However, there are some overlapping areas or duplicated services. So in order to streamline the services and in order to integrate the separated services or decentralize the services, we tried to unify the channel into one, which is called Integrated Welfare Hanaro. So so-called one-stop service would be provided. So you can just make a call to get support. So thanks to this streamlined and overhauled system, the paradigm of the welfare has been innovated. So as a result, our independent and unique model should be developed, and the service model should be permanently effective. So in order to do that, we institutionalized or built the infrastructure for the welfare services to create a place that the disabled people can harmoniously live together with us. Due to the time constraints, that's all about me. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kang Seok-bong. From June 2019, the project for the integrated care initiative for Jeju City, he made a presentation on this tip for the developmental disabled people or the brain injured people were the main subjects for the project. And he mentioned that he highlighted that the project is not just done by the governmental level because it's a collaboration project for the public sector and the private sector. So the demander or user-oriented care could be realized via this project. At the same time, he also mentions that in order to secure the self-reliance of the disabled people, we must secure the basic human rights of right to move, right to walk. So they decided to provide a remarkable services. And when he began his presentation, even in this contactless society, we cannot stop the caregiving. I believe that he kind of expressed his strong will for this project. And thanks to the community mentality of the Jeju residents, this would be possible. And let me invite the second presenter for today's session. Professor Kim Yong-duk from Seonggong-hae University will deliver his presentation. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I am Kim Yong-duk from Seonggong-hae University. I thought a lot about the topic of my presentation, and I named it Community Care for Disabled People in Korean Context. In English, it's like what it is here. So today I'm going to talk about our approaches for the community care for the disabled people in Korea. The concept of community care originates from the philosophy and principles of the policy, the relevant policy. And I think community care is the most natural term to explain the background and circumstances of this policy. So today I'm going to touch on the direction and approaches that have been taken by the Korean society regarding community care for the disabled. So I'm going to touch on 3 points. Starting from the concept, I'm going to talk about Korea's situation regarding community care. And second, when we talk about community care for the disabled, there must be some challenges we face. So secondly, I'm going to talk about challenges. And third, considering the characteristics of the policy, we may think of some alternatives. Briefly talking about the concept of community care, this could be quite a long explanation. However, I'd like to summarize the concept. Around the world, community care is quite a common concept. So horizontally, we have 3 pursuits: community care in the community, community care decentralized in the community, and also community care led by the community. And the areas that could be covered by community care includes conventional care, nursing, as well as attention and assistance. So community care is a kind of integrated concept that embraces all these matters. According to the characteristics of each different region and countries, the community care could be designed differently. The reason why community care is being highlighted so much these days has something to do with population. Back in 1990s, in UK, the proportion of the aged person in their population was already 15%. Surprisingly, in the case of Korea, by 2026, the aged population of Korea will exceed that of UK. So within just 10 years, that there has been tremendous change in our society and population. So that's why Korea is trying to adopt community care just like UK did in 1990s. This diagram shows the overall program and overall process. The flow of service of community care should be led by the community, and also it has to be interconnected with different parties. If we look into this picture here, it explains a lot. But by and large, by coordinating each different parties, we can make harmonious community care. So this concept of community care has 2 sides, welfare and medical care. When we think about the service as social welfare, on the left side, government can assist the community care, and on the right side, private sector support is also required. There could be some direct services provided by the government on the left side, and on the right side, there could be some areas where private-public cooperation is required, and also companies can provide assistance. And also, individual support could be provided by the private sector more effectively. When these 4 sectors are integrated, and the community service and community care service will be in good shape. Regarding the value we are pursuing based on community care is 2 aspects. Self-reliance support is one, and this one has been supported for quite a long time. And the government has trying this values based on a lot of initiatives. On the right side, we also have interdependence. We need to strengthen our interdependence within the community, which is a conventional concept in Korea. And this could be encouraged further by these welfare policies. All in all, the local government could take the lead over the calls. So when we take a look at Korea's community care policy, it was first started as a task force back in 2018. And there have been multiple rounds of initiatives. Starting this year, we have inclusive initiatives. In the past, we used to focus on segments, each different segments, like for the elderly, for the disabled, or for the mentally challenged. But now we are trying to integrate these different systems into one. Today, a number of local governments are trying to carry out these inclusive pilot projects. And under this system, it has one-stop care service center. At this center, information and guidance are provided. And they are adopting new kinds of services. They can confirm the safety of the disabled, and also they can support in terms of their healthcare in order to make sure there's no blind site in the service. Here are some examples of the new services that have been introduced by these inclusive community care for the elderly as well as the disabled. This initiative is trying to provide holistic service for everyone. There could be some challenges that this kind of community care is facing. Some say that community care is all about the institutionalization, but some say that community care should focus on the survival and self-reliance of people. But I believe both should be pursued. So in this regard, I'd like to talk about the direction that has to be followed by the community care policy. First one is deinstitutionalization. There could be different translations of this concept, but according to the dictionary here, there are two types of definitions: release as well as reform. Release means that to discharge the people within the facility so that they could live on their feet. And on the right side, we could also reform the institution so that these facilities could be a venue for everyone in the community to interact. And also, the community care should consider the aging society. As of 2017, ratio of single household to total households of the disabled increased rapidly. In 2017 it was 17.4%, but now it's 27.2%. So community care should consider these problems of the society. And for the developmental disability, we also need to provide assistance. Those aged over 50 with developmental disability may not have their parents. So it's difficult for them to have proper assistance. So when they became 50-something, they have no other option but to be hospitalized or to be institutionalized. For these people, we need to make more in-depth preparation. And also for the disabled, we could provide health-related support, health checkup, and also visiting healthcare service. These are the area where we need to pay more attention. At the same time, we should encourage the disabled to participate in the social activities. The level of social participation of the disabled has drastically discouraged. I think this is well recognized if you take a look at the frequency of going out of these disabled people. Lastly, there could be 3 action plans for the community care for the disabled. First, we could adopt community care for the disabled to support their self-reliance based on community support. This may sound too broad, but this community support could be quite an active concept. And second concept would be focusing on the community care for the elderly. We can add some other benefits to this community care for the elderly. Third option would be based on deinstitutionalization. These are 3 available options we can consider at the moment. So this could be the broad picture for the inclusive community care. Thank you. Professor Kim explained about the concept of community care and the background of Korea's community care, as well as the main challenges of the policy. He highlighted the need to consider the aging population as well as the increase of single household. And also he shared 3 ideas to adopt community care in Korea. Third presenter, Ms. Ines Bulik, will deliver her presentation.
Thank you much for the introduction again. I've been following the previous speakers with a lot of interest. Yes, it is my turn now. I will speak to you about independent living, the right to independent living, and developing plans for supporting disabled people to live independently. This is on my slide a picture from our Mythbuster on independent living, and it shows a man in a wheelchair on a desert island. I'll get to the picture a little bit later to explain it. Just a couple of words about the European Network on Independent Living, which I represent. So we are a Europe-wide network of disabled people active across Europe. We bring together mainly grassroots organizations such as Centers for Independent Living, but also individuals, disabled people who are advocating for independent living in their countries. We are also part of the World Independent Living Network, and I'm very pleased to say we are working together also with colleagues from Japan and Korea, who are also advocating for independent living in their region. ENIL focuses on control and choice of disabled people. That is what we advocate for, through access to personal assistance, peer support, barrier-free environment, housing options, technical aids, and we strongly advocate for the closure of all institutions in Europe. Unfortunately, we still have a lot of those on the continent. We have some major campaigns every year, the aim of which is to raise awareness about the right to independent living. So on the 5th of May, we celebrate the Independent Living Day. We also have the Freedom Drive, where we gather as disabled people from across Europe in Brussels. And we also have the EU Funds for Our Rights campaign, where we monitor how the European Union funding is used in relation to disabled people. And we also intervene where we find that this funding is used to build any type of institution for disabled people. So those are some of the highlights of our work. Now to get to independent living, I notice you are not really using the word independent living, but maybe it's a matter of translation. The right to independent living, as we all know, and to live included in the community, set out in Article 19 of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. I know Korea also is party to the conventions, was one of the first countries to ratify. So Article 19 has three main components, and that is what makes the right to independent living what it is. So first of all, it requires that governments provide every disabled people with a choice of where and with whom to live. It requires that they have access to a range of services, including personal assistance, which facilitate inclusion and prevent isolation and segregation. And finally, Article 19 requires that all governments make mainstream services, so services that are available for the general population, accessible to disabled people, so to prevent the creation of specialized or parallel services aimed exclusively for disabled people. Article 19 is further elaborated on in the General Comment 5, which was adopted by the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And this is a document which we very much use at ENIL when it comes to advocating and explaining to governments what obligations they have under Article 19. And I will also, my presentation is largely based on the General Comment 5. So the General Comment 5 provides authoritative guidance to governments on their obligations under Article 19, and it aims to assist governments in really complying with their obligations under this right. The General Comment 5 includes some key definitions of independent living, being included in the community, of independent living arrangements, and also of personal assistance. And this is what I will start with as well, the definitions. I would like to say that for us, the definitions are very important. And we advocate for definitions to be included in any policy document related to independent living, because there is so much confusion and misinterpretation of independent living, personal assistance, deinstitutionalization. So, for example, independent living is often presented as being self-sufficient or self-reliant. And governments sometimes misuse this to withdraw services from people. So saying, okay, you want to live independently, you're on your own now. And this is very much not the case. This is not what independent living is about, because we are all interdependent and we all need some support. So independent living is really about having the same range of options and the same degree of self-determination that people without disability take for granted. It is about choice and control over our lives and making decisions concerning our lives. So really it is about choice and control for all disabled people. Importantly, independent living is not possible in an institutional environment, so it is not possible in residential care. Independent living is only possible in mainstream society, in service, in housing, and using services such as healthcare, transport, education, that are there for the whole of the population. Long before the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities was adopted, the independent living movement came out with 12 pillars of independent living. And this is really, these are all the preconditions that are necessary for people to be able to live independently. So the 12 pillars include appropriate and accessible information, appropriate and accessible health and social care provision, adequate income, a fully accessible transport system, adequate provision of technical aids and equipment, adequate provision of personal assistance, full access to the environment, availability of accessible and adapted housing, and availability of inclusive education and training. So all these things have to come together for disabled people to be able to live independently. Now coming to the definition of an institution, again, it is important that when we talk about deinstitutionalization and moving away from institutions, we all understand the same thing. So the General Comment 5 has a very comprehensive definition of what an institution is, and it lists certain characteristics. This includes a place where people are made to share assistance and have no or limited influence over who supports them in that place. It is a place where people are isolated and segregated from independent life in the community, where they lack control over day-to-day decisions, where they lack choice over whom to live with, where there is a certain routine. So people get up at a certain time, they have lunch, dinner at a certain time, go to bed, do the same activities every day. There is paternalistic approach in the service provision. So people are taken care of, cared for. They are not given any power or control over what they do. There is usually a disproportionate number of disabled people living in the same environment. And when it comes to children, very importantly, the General Comment states that any place outside of a family, whether it's a biological family or foster family, is an institution. So for children, really, the focus is on the right to grow up in a family, not somewhere else. And here are a couple of pictures of institutions. These are, this is an old institution from Europe. We still have quite a lot of those. Typically, these places would have 200 to 300 people living together, both children and adults. And even though there has been a move away from institutions of this type, we still have quite a few of these large old institutions on the continent. But I also wanted to show you some of the more modern institutions, which is still something, they're also not good, even though they have been built in recent years. So they are smaller settings, but they're only for disabled people. They would typically have between 10, 20 to 25 disabled people living together. They also tend to be in villages or isolated from the community. And as you can see on the picture, people are still treated in a very institutional way, so that they would have a certain routine, really not much freedom of what they do, who they live with, who supports them. So we are also fighting against these type of institutions. And the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities has made it very clear that countries that ratify the convention should also be closing down and moving away from these type of institutions. And when they are closing down large institutions, they should not be moving people into small institutions. So this is a very important point. Now, in terms of personal assistance, there is a definition of personal assistance in the General Comment 5, because this is a key tool for independent living, and it is different from other services, for example, such as home care. So personal assistance, the key characteristic of personal assistance is that it is a user-led support service. So it is the disabled person who tells the assistant what to do, who recruits the assistant, trains the assistant, and basically, the personal assistant works for the disabled person in a way that the disabled person tells them to. Personal assistance, to function properly, it is very important that it is adequately funded, so that personal assistants have good salaries, that disabled people are able to recruit personal assistants from the open labor market. It is very important that the disabled person is in charge, that it is a one-to-one relationship, so one person, one assistant, rather than one assistant working in somewhere and assisting 5 people at the same time. And it is very important that the disabled person is able to manage this service. Now, for some people who are not able to manage the service themselves, there should be some support with that, which can be provided by the Centers for Independent Living, by families, it doesn't matter. But this personal assistance is really key to disabled people being able to live independently. So this is what we are talking about, basically, and these are the key definitions. Now, the key principles of independent living. First of all, independent living refers to all disabled people, regardless of what type of impairment they have, how much support they need, whether they have intellectual disabilities or physical disabilities or autism, or whether they're young or old. So in terms of developing national policy, the vision should certainly be that all disabled people should have a right to independent living. As I said before, one of the key principles is choice. And this is not limited only to where people live, but how they live, whether they have a family or not, whether they are in employment, whether they are in education, whether they want to travel. So people should really have a choice about their lifestyle, shouldn't be forced to do any particular thing. Independent living requires a rights-based approach, so it should be set out as a right in the national legislation, ideally not in health legislation, to avoid an over-medicalized approach. The aim really should be to realize the full inclusion of disabled people in the community. Finally, independent living requires mainstreaming. So every other policy, such as a housing policy, healthcare policy, transport policy, should consider how accessible, how inclusive this this policy, these services are of disabled people. So really, again, this is to avoid creating parallel systems for disabled people in the community. As we know, independent living, the right to independent living is subject to progressive realization. This is because, of course, it is the fact that putting the right to independent living in practice requires resources. So countries must spend money to put in place services, to make services accessible, etc. But I think what is very important here is that certain parts of the right to independent living are subject to immediate applications. So when it comes to closing down institutions, this is something that countries should do immediately. At the same time, of course, developing community-based services for people leaving institutions. But the point is, countries cannot use progressive realization as an excuse to delay the closure of institutions and giving people the opportunities to live included in the community. And there is a lot of misunderstanding in relation to this. So it is an important really point to have in mind. And finally, the Article 19 has three components. Countries have an obligation to respect, to protect, and to fulfill the right to independent living. And each of these requires a certain number of measures to be taken. So when it comes to the obligation to respect, so first of all, countries have an obligation to refrain from putting in place laws, policies, and structures that create barriers to independent living. There is an obligation to release people who are being held against their will in any form of institution. There is a need to remove all forms of guardianship, so to ensure that people have support in making decisions rather than those decision-making powers being taken away from them. And countries have an obligation to phase out institutionalization, so no new institutions should be built, even those that may be presented as community living. Under the obligation to protect, countries have an obligation to prevent family members and others from directly or indirectly interfering with independent living. So even though family members are often the best advocates to independent living, where family members do not want their son or daughter to leave institutions, this should not be causing barriers to deinstitutionalization. Very importantly, no public or private funds should be spent on maintaining institutional care. Countries should not be institutionalizing people under the guise of community living, so building smaller institutions or villages for disabled people or similar types of facilities. And the support that is developed should be based on individual requirements, not interests of service providers or anyone else. And here monitoring is very important. And finally, they should prohibit discrimination in access to services, whether this is age-based discrimination or discrimination based on the type of impairment. The last obligation is the obligation to fulfill. And here, there is a large number of measures that countries should be implementing, developing to ensure full realization of independent living. And this is very important and very useful for countries developing roadmaps or strategies for independent living in terms of thinking about all the things that need to be done. So here there is a need to empower family members, to consult with a diverse range of disabled people, to adopt a strategy and a concrete action plan for deinstitutionalization, to provide ways to cover disability-related costs and to put in place accessible housing, to make sure that all the services are affordable, to introduce human rights-based assessments in terms of deciding who has a right to access which services, to think about cash transfers or personal budgets, direct payments, so to reform the way services are funded, to ensure access to information, to ensure there is adequate training of all the staff working in social care, healthcare provision, to ensure access to justice, to provide adequate support to family member carers, and to make sure that all the barriers to independent living are well analyzed, well noted, so as to be able to work on eliminating all of those. Finally, my final point is that Article 19.
자, 예, 사무총장님
Ines, I'm sorry but within just 90 seconds, would you please finish your presentation? Because it's a bit delayed, I'm sorry. 90 seconds.
I'm just at the end, so no problem. Finally, it is important to understand that Article 19 is closely linked to the implementation of other articles of the Convention, such as, for example, Article 12 on legal capacity. And I will end here. I would just like to point you in the direction of some existing resources, such as the Common European Guidelines for the Transition from Institutional to Community-Based Care, which might be useful also in terms of developing any deinstitutionalization plans and strategies. So thank you very much for your attention. I have provided some resources here. Hopefully you will get the presentation, and I'm open for any questions. Over.
네, 감사하고
For your insightful presentation, and I'm really sorry that we could not give sufficient time for your presentation. So you have been working for the protection for the disabled people and securing their independent life and inclusive life in the local community. Thank you for all the three presenters, and now is the time for us to have a quick panel discussion in only 16 minutes. So would you please just make a comment within just 3 minutes because of time constraint? I'm sorry. 3 minutes are given to all of you.
First, to Mr. Shin Yong-ho from Division of Rights Promotion for Persons with Disabilities. Hello, everyone. I'm honored to be here. I'd like to thank all the presenters. The number of facilities for the disabled is around 50,000, and around 16,000 people are employed to support the disabled. And the budget is almost 600 billion won per year. And also within this budget, we are providing housing services for the disabled. From 2018, budget has been increased by 50% or so. In the Moon administration, there have been 3 major shifts in the disabled policy. And now we are putting more focus on the institutionalization by the end of the regime. And during the administration, we have conducted 2 rounds of researches on the deinstitutionalization and established community care model. So to share the conclusion of the researches, in August this year, we are going to announce master plan. And in December last year, a bill for the institutionalization was proposed in the National Assembly. In Daegu and Jeju Island, the Korean government started some initiatives. The central government did not provide any specific guideline for the initiative. It's just determined and designed by respective local governments. And going forward, I believe 8 more facilities will be integrated with these initiatives. And also, we plan to provide consulting for 4 facilities. And I highly encourage Daegu City as well as Jeju Province to participate in this consulting program to make further improvement in their initiative projects. As we have many officials from the Jeju government, I'd like to urge you to make more active participation in the consulting service with the Ministry of Welfare, Health and Welfare. Once again, I'd like to appreciate the organizers for the hard work to arrange this venue, and I'd like to convey my appreciation to everyone here. Thank you. Second panelist is Mr. Kim Dong-ho.
Good afternoon. I'm really delighted to have an opportunity to make my remark during our session today. And first of all, it's really remarkably happy to have a separate session for the disabled people and welfare policies. Thank you for the organizer of today's forum. Thank you. Especially those who are working for the Jeju municipal government, I would like to express my appreciation for your efforts. On behalf of the Disabled People's Federation, due to the constraint in time, let me just skip over some small parts. However, I would like to highlight that there has been a lot of policies for the disabled people, and we need to consider the concept of human rights for the disabled people. This is what's really important these days. And regarding the independent living, IL, I believe there's no need to repeat the definition and the basic knowledges about the independent living. So let's just skip. So what's at the core of the independent living is that it's focused more on local community in terms of the living space, the social network, social role, and the various social aspects. And as previous presenters highlighted, the inclusive support service is really important in terms of personal care, personal assistance, and the right to make own decision, etc. Regarding the local community integrated care, we don't need to talk about 101 now. But what I really want to highlight here is that the acts on the integrated care at the local community is pending now. But regarding the medical services, rehabilitation services, all the important services for the disabled are integrated in this package. And this is the orientation of the initiative. And in this regard, the IL, independent living, and the integrated care at the local community are actually in the same context. So one's choice and the control over their own living would be the important points of the welfare policies direction for the disabled people. And what could be the expectations over the integrated care at the local community? First of all, let me talk about the system for the service provision, feature, and characteristics must be overhauled because the conventional system has been separated and decentralized. So now we need to overhaul and streamline the decentralized services. In particular, for the severely disabled people, we have to try to include include those people into the service. That's the main message of the direction of the policies currently made in Korea. And the government is trying to conduct this type of care services, and we were luckily selected as a pilot project or initiative project along with Daegu. And we found some pain points based on the result from the pilot project. So it was really hard to well respond to the requirements of the disabled people, and the service was more focused on protection and nursery. So we just did not consider well about the local communities' characteristics and the local requirements. And the other thing was that the tool for consideration was quite limited, so they were just focused on medical services. So the tasks for future would be largely the integrated care is to support by adopting a few alternatives, such as drastically contain or reflect the requirements from the disabled people. And I believe that that's the correct direction for the policy. But in order to realize this, we have to overhaul the law and order, and the disability rating system or other systems must be revised fundamentally. And the total care center for the disabled people and other service providers must overhaul and revise their role and responsibilities. And we need to have a separate approach different from the care for the elderly. In order to strengthen the public good for the disabled people, we are establishing a lot of different channels at the administrative units, and we are trying to strengthen the services that are provided for the disabled people. But we don't think we need to have a different track. But as I highlighted before, we have to secure the independent life of the disabled people, and that should be the ultimate goal of the welfare system. And in reality, it's quite difficult to provide the service which is in a perfect way. However, at least we must set up our own goal in details, and we have to prepare for the necessary resources to make these goals into reality. So when we set up the integrated care goals, that should be the important part. Thank you.
센터 김정득
Let me invite Ms. Kim Jong-duk from Jeju Research Institute. Hello, everyone. I am Kim Jong-duk from Jeju Research Institute. So based on the presentations, I have a couple of questions, but in the interest of time, I need to speed up my speech. So Jeju province was the only government, local government, that have adopted two initiative projects simultaneously. So today, I am delighted to have this meaningful opportunity to share the performance and achievement of those initiative projects. There are several areas we found some difficulties. In line with community care, we have this plan named Social Service 1. For decades, we have struggled to deal with this issue. Although we have good policies on one hand, the implementation and communication of such policy was not good enough. If you take a look at the diagram here, we have three basic concepts for social welfare system in Korea: public assistance, social service, and social insurance. The community care we are talking about here can be provided to the beneficiaries of these three different concepts altogether. So the channels are quite different. However, the service we are providing to the beneficiary is not different at all. As Professor Kim mentioned, we all understand why community care was required in the first place. In fact, Korea is one of the fastest aging society around the world. So this aging issue is closely connected to this welfare system. But we have three different channels to support the elderly as well as the disabled. With the rapidly aging population of the elderly and the disabled, we need to reform these policy channels. But at the moment, the provision of a related service is too confusing. Due to limited time, I have to summarize what I have to say. This is the research area we are focusing on at my research institute. We haven't found the solution to these problems. We are trying best in order to address all these issues, but the thing is, we need to make sure the financial assistance will maintain. And it's almost impossible for local government like Jeju Island to support these issues financially on a sustainable manner. So there have been many acts and regulations that are supporting this area. But the central government-oriented projects sometimes undermine the effectiveness of local government's initiatives because there could be some duplicated policies led by the central government and led by local government at the same time. We need to have unity in the development of new policies going forward. And Jeju City is making good performance regarding community care for the disabled. But it has to be done within the budget and the number of employees.
Lastly, let's invite the last speaker for today's panel discussion, Professor. So I will give you the answer within just 1 minute. So if you share the screen for us, the last page, please. I've been doing a lot of pilot projects, and pilot projects are just pilot projects. That has been my pain point. A lot of people shared a lot of wonderful stories, but what I'm really agonizing over is that, as I repeat again and again, we have to develop the service that could be turned into action. And we have to make a plan for the actionable services, and we have to make it sustainable. That's the pain points, and that's the thing that we must solve. And I believe that the former presenters are enjoying their advanced system in their countries, but in Korea, we have to make it realized. And in order to do that, we must adjust the budget and service. And what was really remarkable for Jeju case was that they could flexibly adjust the budget and service. So there are a lot of various services, and one can just choose between the options. And is that enough? I need to consider it into a better way. And I believe that all the services must be provided for the developmental handicapped people. Are you really happy about physically handicapped people? What about the blind people? What about the people who are challenged in hearing? So in our ultimate goal, we must support the developmental disabled people, but we have to consider the physically disabled people at the same time. That's all about it. Thank you for your brief discussion, Professor. And thank you for taking your cherishable time, but I'm really sorry that we cannot take your questions from the floor. But I would like to thank 7 panels and presenters for today's session. Thank you. And the local reliance for the disabled people session is done now. Thank you. This marks the end of today's session for the disabled people and welfare policies. Let's give them a big round of hands. Let's give the panels and the presenters a big round of hands after.